Hello there, I'm Allie and welcome to my channel. Today's video is part 3 in a series documenting the making of an 1860s inspired version of Ariel's pink ball gown from Disney's The Little Mermaid. We're working on this project from the skin out, so in the previous 2 installments we made a chemise and bloomers and a corset. Today we're making the last of the underwear and arguably the most important pieces for the shape of this gown, the hoop skirt and petticoat. Today we're working on the last of the undergarments and arguably the most important pieces for the shape of the gown, the hoop skirt and the petticoat. I chose the 1860s for this project because not only is it my favorite era of Victorian fashion, but I feel that the 1860s does the best job of representing the silhouette, styles, and overall vibe of the gown that we're recreating. Links to patterns and materials will be in the description down below. Let's get into it. I cut out the bottom sections of the hoop skirt, called a bag out of bleached cotton muslin from Joanns Fabrics, RIP, and I used TV 103 from Truly Victorian on Etsy as my pattern. I looked around specifically for an elliptical hoop skirt pattern that had a hoop bag because that wide section of fabric at the bottom prevents you from accidentally stepping through the hoops and tripping. Knowing my lack of coordination, that was a necessity. I used a water-soluble marker to mark where I would need to sew the hoop channels. This piece of the costume was definitely the first reason I wanted to make an 1860s gown. I adore the elliptical skirts of this era. I think they're so stunning and princessy with the little train and just, peak. This crescent is made up of 4 layers of muslin and is the spot where most of the vertical tapes attach to the waistband. I marked those registration marks for where the tapes attached with my water-soluble marker and labeled each space accordingly. I made this little crescent 3 separate times because I am just a girl who thinks she's better than the pattern instructions sometimes, and I need to be humbled about that. I flipped the marked piece over so it would be right sides together with the others, then sewed 1/2 inch from the edge around just the curved side and trimmed the seam allowance down with my pinking shears and turned it right side out. Next, I stitched around the curve about 1/2 inch from the edge, then 1/2 inch from that line, and 1/2 inch from that one, repeated over and over again until the whole crescent was quilted down. This quilting helps to strengthen the crescent so that it holds its shape better. Why does it look like I'm skipping over the places where the tapes attach? It's because I am. Don't worry about it. This is one of the times I goofed up the crescent. I was going to try and insert the tapes in between the layers for a prettier finish. To finish the straighter edge, I overcast it by machine, then gave it a good press with my iron. To finish the edge of the waistband, I stay stitched about 1/4 inch from the edge and then did a 1/4 inch rolled hem to neatly encase the raw edge. I initially used a cotton twill tape for the waistband, but I later replaced it with the same polyester grosgrain ribbon that I used for the vertical tapes because the cotton twill was not strong enough to support the weight of the skirt. I used a little metal slide buckle as my closure for the waistband. I attached the buckle to the other side of the waistband by including it in the rolled hem. I put the waistband on my dress form so I could perfectly align the crescent and then top stitch the crescent to the waistband. Then it was time to prep all the vertical tapes. I used 1 inch wide polyester grosgrain ribbon that I cut down to size according to each of the pattern pieces, then melted the ends to prevent fraying. I used a punch to cut notches in the pattern pieces where it indicated the placement of the top of each horizontal tape, then transferred the markings with a water-soluble marker. I folded the tops of the tapes and lined up each tape to the appropriate marked place on the crescent and width stitched them together. This hoop skirt required the most hand sewing out of any part of this costume, and it very quickly taught me how important it is to wear a thimble. I absolutely shredded my fingers sewing all the tapes by hand. I use a GoPro strapped to my chest to get these hand sewing shots and the shots of me at my sewing machine, and I swear that either the lens is always dirty or I have the settings goofed up on it because why is my footage always blurry? It's always blurry or out of frame. I will improve, I promise. I next stitched all the bag panels together along the short sides into one long strip, skipping the center front and trying to match the marked hoop channels as best as possible. I folded the bag in half to match the long sides and sewed most of that seam, leaving about 14 inches open in the center front to allow me to insert the hoops. Then I stitched the center front seam to make the strip into a big tube ring. Next, I stitched all the hoop channels into the bag, again leaving a 14-inch gap at the center front. You can see by the mess of blue lines that my lining up of the markings wasn't perfect and I had to place some connect the dots to make things match up more neatly. I sewed on all the vertical tapes by machine along the already sewn channel lines in the bag. I cut all my lengths of hoop steel and bone casing down to the lengths listed in the pattern. I used 10mm hoop steel and 20mm bone casing from farthingales. I inserted the hoops into the bag first, starting from the bottom and working my way up. I hand sewed shut the openings of each channel after inserting each of the 4 hoops. I connected the hoops together with metal hoop connectors, also from farthingales. I used pins to mark where the pattern indicated the horizontal hoop casings needed to intersect with the vertical tapes, slid each length of hoop steel into the corresponding casing, and still working from the bottom up, clipped each hoop casing to the vertical tapes. There are 12 hoops in total, 8 full circles and 4 half. This hoop skirt probably only weighs a pound or 2, but having all that hung just on my waist was way heavier than I expected. I then proceeded to backstitch by hand each of the 64 intersections of the vertical and horizontal tapes. You may notice that my nails are entirely different in this clip. That's because I got 0 footage of any of the hand sewing, and the only reason this clip exists is because some of the stitching came undone and I had to redo it. The 4 half hoops at the top have ties attached to them which tie together to create that oval elliptical shape and support the skirt against your butt. I used 1/4 inch wide grosgrain ribbon for the ties and also used that ribbon to bind the edges of the casings for a neat and secure finish. On to the petticoat. I used the same cotton muslin and pattern TV 247 from Truly Victorian on Etsy. I debated for a while how I wanted to make the petticoat. I initially wanted to do a roughly 3-tiered petticoat, but the elliptical shape means there'd be a lot of math involved in making the panels look right, and then ended up being way too much math for my smooth brain to handle, so I ended up just using the pattern I bought for my skirt and modified the construction slightly to give it the look that I wanted. I stitched all the pieces together by machine with 1/2 inch seam allowance and pressed the seams open. Then I made the terrible decision to flat fell all these long seams. Don't get me wrong, the seams look stunning, but it took way more time than necessary. I trimmed 1/2 of the seam down to about 1/4 inch, then pressed the wide side of the seam around the smaller one to neatly encase all the raw edges. I top stitched the pressed seam down as close to the folded edge as possible, and by the 3rd one, I was questioning my choices, but at that point I was in too deep. For the center back seam, I hemmed both sides of the seam with a 1/4 inch rolled hem, since several inches at the top of the skirt need to be left open to allow me to get the skirt on and off. I cartridge pleat the top of the skirt down to fit into the waistband. When I'm cartridge pleating a long piece of material like this, I like to work with 2 needles at the same time so I can do both my lines of stitching at once. In my head, it saves time, but I have never actually timed myself doing it both ways to prove that. I folded one of the long sides of the waistband in by 1/2 inch, then pressed it in half. I stitched the waistband ends together, trimmed the seam allowance, and stitched the waistband to the skirt by machine. I whip stitched the inside of the waistband to the skirt, and actually using a thimble, because I learned my lesson with that hoop skirt. I marked the placement of the buttonholes and did those by machine. Wow, speeding up the footage makes my needle do weird looking things. I love it. I used 2 1/2 inch shell buttons for my stash and attached those to the other side of the waistband. I came up with what I think is a pretty genius way to trim the length of the petticoat. I put the hoop skirt and petticoat on my dress form, then stuck a ring light underneath so the light would shine through and I could see exactly where to cut to level the petticoat with the hoop skirt. I serged the raw edge of the petticoat to get rid of any weird spots and to finish the edge. Finally, trim. I wanted to have that classic Disney princess scallop petticoat thing you see basically any time a princess lifts her skirt up, so I put this eyelet trim on both the hoop skirt and the petticoat. I pinned the trim on with right sides together and stitched it on by machine, then flipped it down and top stitched it in place. And with that, the final 2 undergarments of 1860's Ariel are done. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, leave me a comment, and consider subscribing if you'd like to see more from me. Don't forget to click the notification bell so that YouTube lets you know every time I upload for this project or future projects. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!